Okay, we have a lot to cover today, so we're going to get started. So welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this webinar on freedom to operate. I'm Sharon Ho, one of the IP directors at NGen. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started. We are recording this webinar, so you can access it at a later time, refresh your memory. And after the presentation, we will send you a copy of the slides and also some key takeaways and toolkits. If you have a question during the webinar, please type it into the Q&A. Next slide, please. So a quick word about NGen. For those who are not familiar with us, we are a federally funded nonprofit that provides funding for industry collaborations that advance manufacturing capabilities in Canada. Please check out our website for more information about NGen and our upcoming events. Next slide, please. Next slide. Thank you. So we are delighted to have with us today two experts on FTO from Innovation Asset Collective, Ron Oliver and Sporthy Kondaviti. Sporthy is the Director of IP Analytics at IAC. Sporthy supports IAC members in establishing sound IP strategies and leveraging IAC's programs as they execute on their business strategies. Sporthy has a master's in electrical engineering from New York University and has over a decade of experience in IP consulting. She has worked with major semiconductor and other high-tech clients around the world, helping them with their IP strategy. Ron is IAC's Director of IP Business Development. Ron works as part of the Freedom to Operate team at IAC by helping to identify key markets and technical areas to acquire patents and freedom to operate licenses. Ron has 20 years of experience in the high-tech sector, 16 of which are in the IP space. Ron was a director of licensing at Wyland Technologies, where he negotiated patent licensing agreements. He also managed university research partnerships for Huawei Canada, and most recently, he managed multiple aspects of a government-funded clean tech demonstration project. Without further ado, I will pass it over to the team at IAC.
Thank you for the introduction, Sharon.
You're welcome.
Are we going to the next slide? Or do we want to bid on Innovation Asset Collective? So I think I dropped the ball on that one. So IAC, basically, we are funded by the federal government through ISED. Our mandate is to help clean tech companies improve their IP positions, through a couple different programs that we offer. There's an education component where we're helping clean tech SMEs better understand different aspects of IP, IP strategy, patents, trademarks, trade secrets, and whatnot. We have a grant program where member companies that are filing patents and other types of intellectual property can submit an application to receive a grant for funding, usually on a quarterly basis. Sporthy is part of the analytics team, and she does patent landscaping and market analytics, a number of different sectors related to clean tech. And as Sharon mentioned, I am with the team that's building the patent portfolio for IAC. That portfolio is meant to provide patent assets that our member companies could use for cross-licensing if they got into a position where a larger company with a lot of patents was asserting patents against them and telling them that they needed to take a license to their technology. This slide, we're going to speak a bit about IAC's IP experts. I mentioned I have a licensing background, and Sporthy's background is in analytics. We've got a number of others on staff that have backgrounds in patent agents, patent lawyers, and a few others that are strategy experts and are also involved in patent analysis. Next slide, please. So what is IP risk? So I'm going to talk briefly about two different types. There's internal risk. That's the sort of risk that can lead to the loss of confidential information. Those losses are usually caused by action taken by someone internal to the organization, whether that's intentionally or by accident. That could be the sort of thing like a leak of CAD files or firmware, data sets, customer lists, the sort of things that if they get into the wrong hands, your competitors can use that data to shortcut years of work that you have done to get ahead in that area. Companies mitigate that sort of risk by locking down access to those sorts of things, logging who downloads or shares them, having clear IP policies and training, offboarding checks to make it harder, reminding people of their obligations as they're leaving the company. Then there's external risk. That's where FTO generally comes into play. It entails basically being locked out of a market or a value chain. So that happens, if you have a rival's patent that covers a feature that you ship, they can use that patent to block imports or force you off of key platforms and, make it so that your suppliers will not want to deal with you unless you have a license. An example of that would be a smart home thermostat. So, they might be trying to sell to a big customer, and they basically run into a situation where they have a competitor that's got some patents. Their customer is aware of that. They're not willing to engage with them until they've resolved that patent issue. So companies mitigate that by building FTO into their product planning early. So we're going to discuss what FTO is in greater detail and provide some real world examples in the next couple of slides. Next slide, please. So freedom to operate. It's really about one simple question. Can you safely make, use, and sell your product in a given market without infringing someone else's IP? So owning a patent of your own doesn't give you freedom to operate. A patent in itself is an exclusionary right that basically gives you the right to block others from doing what that patent describes. So they're not a right to sell the technology. There might be other IP around what you're doing that other third parties own. And just because you have your patent does not mean you're free to go to market. You need to be aware of what they own and what you're potentially infringing if you do go to market. An example, I'll give you an engine control units. Maybe you've developed technology related to that, but you also might need a license around power electronics, security aspects, communication, safety, or some other hardware features that someone else owns. So it's important to map that stuff early and look where you need to get licenses or do design rounds before you go to market so you aren't blocked or hit with surprise royalties. Next slide, please. So why does it matter? In the next few slides, we're going to give you some real world examples to help you understand why it matters, and they'll show the potential cost of not addressing it. Next, please. So I don't know, how many people are familiar with Qualcomm. Everyone's familiar with Apple. Qualcomm holds thousands of patents related to wireless standards, so 3G, 4G, 5G, and phone makers need to implement those standards, or otherwise they're selling essentially a brick. So you can't ship a modern smartphone without having a license from Qualcomm. Even a company of Apple's size and stature eventually needed to accept that fact. But first they had years of global litigation and even sales bans on some iPhones before they finally settled in 2019. And at that point, they paid Qualcomm somewhere between 4.5 and 4.7 billion for a one-time payment, plus ongoing royalties. And that gave them a 6-year license so they could keep shipping their iPhones without an injunction risk. Next slide, please. So some of you might be too young to remember the instant camera craze of the 70s. As illustrated by the photo to the right, I lived through the boom with the evidence captured for posterity. In the mid-70s, Polaroid essentially owned instant photography. They had a ton of patents to back that up, but Kodak decided they were going to jump into the market anyway. They launched a full line of instant cameras and film, built factories, had big marketing campaigns, sold over 10 million cameras into that market, and Polaroid sued. So there was almost a decade of litigation, and a judge eventually ruled that Kodak system infringed Polaroid's patent, issued an injunction, and immediately Kodak had to stop making and selling instant film cameras. So they had 13 million cameras out in the world. They're useless because you couldn't buy film for them. They then had to write check to Polaroid for close to $1 billion in damages, and they completely left that market. So when you factor in, the inflation and whatnot, we're talking $2.2 billion in today's money, and having to walk away entirely from a market that they had jumped into. Next slide. So this one is a Canadian story. Some people might remember back in the early 2000s when a patent holding company called NTP sued RIM. That suit was initially filed in 2001, 2002, 2003 timeframe. It went to a jury trial. The jury found that they had willfully infringed NTP's patents. So what does willful infringement mean? It's deliberate or intentional disregard of a patent holder's rights. And it's basically when an infringer knows about a patent and continues with the infringing activities anyway. It's considered bad faith or reckless disregard for the patent laws. So the jury had initially awarded NTP $33 million, which the judge later increased to $53.7 million because of the willful nature. So while RIM didn't know about the patents when it initially developed the BlackBerry system, they didn't go about it properly as far as obtaining a legal opinion. They relied on the legal opinion of in-house counsel versus going externally, and that factored into the judgment that the judge ultimately made. So 2003, there was an injunction that was ordered to prevent RIM from making or selling their devices into the US. 2004, 2006, they unsuccessfully appealed through different court levels. Finally, it was, they wanted it to go to the Supreme Court, who declined to hear it, which left the infringement ruling intact. And in March 2006, they were facing a court hearing to enforce the injunction, which would have shut down their networks. And they reached an out-of-court settlement for $612.5 million. So that is the kind of worst case scenario. Next slide, please. The next couple are some Canadian examples, some smaller companies. So that's just to show that, the first couple examples that I've given have been huge multi-billion-dollar companies. They're not the only ones that need to worry about this. So Fluid Energy is a Calgary-based oil field chemicals maker. They make safe acid formulations. They've got revenue of around $50 million, so nowhere near the levels that an Apple or a Qualcomm would have. Exeltex is another Calgary-based company. They supply chemicals. Their revenue is estimated to be around $5 million. In October of 2019, Fluid sued Exeltex on 9 patents related to safe acids. Claiming they'd infringed Fluid's patents. They sent some cease and desist letters to some of Exeltex's suppliers and trucking providers, saying they'd infringed Fluid's patents by dealing with Exeltex, and they threatened to sue those companies unless they stopped. So Exeltex managed to get a judge to issue a restraining order from Fluid, sending more letters. In 2020, they granted an injunction to stop that. In 2021, the underlying patent infringement case was dismissed, and it ended the case without a ruling on whether there had been infringement or whatnot. But, the key takeaway from this is you need to have plans before you're targeted. Even though this didn't go to a finding of infringement or anything, there was significant impact on the business. So, it can impact your supplier strategies and whatnot, and having, credible freedom to operate plans can help to mitigate that. Next slide, please. So this next stage, again, Calgary companies. I don't know what it is out there, Sharon, but they're the only ones that I could find for Canadian examples. So NCS Multistage is Houston and Calgary. They're a public oil field services company. Their revenue is around $142 million. Cobalt is based in Calgary. Significantly smaller revenue, about $8 million. In 2018, NCS sued Cobalt on multiple Canadian patents related to fracturing technology, and Cobalt countersued. So they had a multi-year, high complex patent case with 6 patents and about 145 asserted claims. The federal court ultimately issued a trial judgment addressing infringement and validity. They said all 5 NCS patents were invalid and not infringed, and found the smaller company, Cobalt's patent, was valid and infringed by NCS. So Cobalt ended up receiving a lump sum, $2.4 million. NCS has appealed. October 25, they won a partial procedural win, but things are still kind of up in the air. But the key takeaway from this is, even where an SME ultimately wins key findings at trial, they had a years-long portfolio scale fight with a rival. So there were heavy financial costs, and it disrupts your business process or focus. So if there had been, earlier freedom to operate, they could have potentially turned that into, something where they were able to settle it quicker, identify the exposure and avoid it, adjust or something, but it might not have cost what it ultimately cost them. Next slide, please. So, one of the questions I get a lot is, well, we're an SME. We hear about all these big companies. We don't often hear about small companies. Why do we need to worry about it? The thing that I would say, again, my experience, as Sharon mentioned, I was involved in patent licensing for about 5 years. So I was the guy that was sitting writing infringement notices to companies. A lot of small companies received notices saying that they had infringed patents that we owned. None of those made it to the newspapers or to the nightly news because they generally just settle. 90% settle before trial, and the vast majority of them settle early. So the outcomes aren't public. So they're kind of, forgive the obvious metaphor here, but they're the tip of the iceberg, the ones that you hear about in the news. Next slide. So when and how should small companies think about freedom to operate? When is a question that really has a range of answers depending on the stage of your company. If you're at the idea stage, maybe you want to do a quick scan for obvious no-go zones. You want to note any standards that imply future licensing. So if you're designing something that relies on, one of the telecom standards, you need to know that you're going to have to take licenses or use parts that are licensed by big companies like Qualcomm. If it's, something related to imaging or video, there's standards related to those sorts of things. You can identify those at the early stage and, kind of get ahead of what you're going to need there. If you're at the prototype stage, you want to check the features that you're actually going to be building and try and consider design around options. At the pilot stage, you want to align everything with kind of real use cases. You want to look at your suppliers, confirm whether any of them are willing to indemnify you and to what extent. Indemnity is basically where a supplier, if they're giving you, for example, a chipset that's going to be used to provide wireless functionality, well, you want to be sure that if there's a patent asserted against you for infringement of a wireless patent, that the guy that gave you the chipset that provides that functionality is going to take care of it. That's essentially what indemnity means. And, sometimes there's different levels of indemnity. So you want to be well aware of that before you go too far down a path. And then if there's some parts that you flagged as risky, swap them if you can. Also give some consideration to, if we do get into a situation where there's going to be a problem, what are alternatives that I can spec in? So then when you're at the stage where you actually have your first customers and you're starting to ship some products, you want to make sure that you've got all the licenses you need and design arounds for the jurisdictions that you're selling into. And by that, I mean, if at your earlier stages, you were really just considering what's going to affect me in Canada, this is where I'm doing this. Now, if you're looking at, I'm going to be shipping a product to the US or maybe to Europe or somewhere, you need to look at, is there different IP that I need to be aware of for those jurisdictions and take those things into consideration. Then, finally, when you get to the scale or expansion stage, you want to be monitoring patent filings and, really being aware of anything new that's coming down that could cause you problems. Don't just kind of rest on your laurels. I got to the point where I was able to ship this, everything is good now, because it's an ongoing process. Next slide, or sorry, same slide. So the different companies, how do they act on it? It is largely dependent on what your focus is. So if you're a hardware SME, for instance, the risk there is that a single infringing chip or sensor or module can trigger import bans or recalls or force a redesign. So if your supplier won't indemnify you and stand behind it, you end up footing the cost and having all the disruption. So for that, sort of thing, you want to insist on supplier indemnities and pre-planned substitutes, knowing, okay, if I get a problem with this chip, I can substitute this one. I'm not going to have an issue. Maybe it's something that was going to cost you more and you went with the other one, but at least you're aware of your options. If you're a software or a data company, you basically have risk that if you have a single library or it's a standard or borrowed feature can trigger patent claims or open source terms. They might threaten your product or force expensive rewrites. So you want to basically be aware of what your open source software standards exposure is, identify any features that are a risk, and document what designs are clean. If your product relates to process technologies or industrial things, your key IP risk is how you do those things, not just what you sell. So we're talking chemical plants, battery and materials processing, food processing, semiconductor fabs, those sorts of things. For those, you want to map method claims to their exact steps and tweak sequences and conditions to take licenses where you need them. You want to identify them early, and it's better to take a license than to try and skate around it. Key point there, there's some common considerations. It's not one size fits all. Every company should have a strategy that's unique to their specific business and situation. Next slide. Actually, that's it for me. I hand it over to Sporty.
Thanks, Ron. Those were really interesting examples. Some of the details that Ron said, I hadn't heard of them before too. So in this slide, I want to start by clarifying that we are not just talking about an FTO assessment here. That's only one part of the bigger picture you see on the slide. An FTO assessment typically covers the detailed patent search and the legal or risk analysis steps, whereas an FTO strategy starts much earlier, extends well beyond these two components. It's about integrating FTO, freedom to operate, into your R&D, business, and IP strategy from the start. The first step, and it's kind of highlighted or grayed out, I would say, is a patent landscape analysis. It's not technically FTO analysis, but before you even define your scope for your FTO, it's important to step back and look at the broader patent environment. Maybe that is a detailed patent landscape analysis that helps you identify key players, technology trends, and white spaces. In other words, where potential risks and opportunities exist. Or maybe it's a high-level one because you don't have the investment or time to do that. If you don't already have a detailed landscape, it's worth doing a high-level, lighter landscape before diving into your FTO work. And we can have an actual full presentation on patent landscape analysis, but we'll stick to FTO. But if you do have a patent landscape updated, it becomes a strategic decision-making tool, not just for FTO, but for R&D investment, maybe your partnership strategy, as well as maybe when you're filing your patents, patentability analysis, and other filing strategies. But that could be another webinar. So the next step, say we assume you've done some high-level patent landscape analysis, the next step would be defining the scope, and hence the investment cost of your FTO analysis. We'll go into more detail on the next slide on defining the scope, but I'll touch high-level items on this one. This step determines the quality and efficiency of everything that follows, and also the cost, like I mentioned, into the FTO analysis. You define what's being assessed, where you need freedom to operate, and how deep the assessment needs to go. That includes the product definition, its function, target geographies, and product timeline. Is this an early stage concept, or are you ready to launch and commercialize? Then comes one of the most important parts and exciting for me as I am in IP analytics is the keyword and search strategy. This is a strategic skill to develop and one that helps and pays off well beyond your freedom to operate analysis. And I have more details to give about on the next slide. The stronger and more structured your keyword and search strategy, the better the starting point for your service provider or your search team. You could be doing this internally, or maybe you're reaching out to a service provider to do this. It still helps, and more focused your results will be. The next step is the actual FTO search and analysis. So we assume you've defined the scope of all what you need and how deep it needs to go. The targeted search begins. Usually you focus on live patents, enforceable patents in your chosen markets. Whoever the searching team is, internal or external, the searchers then screen results, remove irrelevant patents, tag relevance, maybe high, medium, low. Usually that's how it's done. Then comes the FTO analysis. Maybe the ones that are marked as high risk, you map them against your product features, you identify overlaps, the risks are categorized. How risky is this patent for your freedom to operate? And where necessary, you might seek a formal legal opinion. Now, Ron touched on this a little bit with the willful infringement part. We usually hear this concern that once you know or review a company's patent, you can be accused of willful infringement. And some teams actually take that as a reason to avoid looking altogether. But the reality is, not knowing doesn't protect you. It just increases the chance of accidental infringement and the cost of fixing it later, which we've seen can be quite high. The key is how you manage the process. Keep it structured, documented, and guided by legal advice. By having a formal FTO assessment, ideally with an external written legal opinion for the higher risk findings, you actually demonstrate due diligence, which is one of the defenses against a willful infringement claim. There are examples and cases out there to support that. So the best practice and the key takeaway here is to look early, look carefully, and document responsibly, but don't avoid the search, and manage it strategically and defensively. And I think that's what turns an FTO search from any sort of a legal risk into a strategic asset. And the other key takeaway from this is you can do all of this, but remember that FTO is not 100% guaranteed. It does reduce risk and positions you to make informed choices. The next step, I'm just looking for any questions out there, but the next step is risk mitigation. Say if you identified some risks, there are several ways and paths to mitigate that risk. Designing around, licensing, cross-licensing, acquiring a patent, and if it's a weak patent, challenge the validity of the patent. Again, something that Ron mentioned before, it's not a one-size-fits-all. Choosing the right strategy depends on your business goals, what kind of partnerships are you looking for, and your tolerance for risk. The last part is integration and continuous monitoring. Like I said, FTO is not just a two-step process. It's not once and done. It's part of building an IP-aware culture across your organization. It's a continuous, integrated process that evolves with your business and technology. So first part of that is embed FTO into your R&D, business workflows, maybe do FTO check of some level at the key milestones, concept, prototype, pilot, launch. The goal isn't to slow innovation, but to inform design and investment decisions early. So if a patent blocks a feature, maybe you can design around before committing major resources, money, or your team resources to that. The next step is keep monitoring. Patents are constantly changing because your competitors are filing for new patents, and also patents do expire and get abandoned. So it's not just I've done it once and I'm done. One of the things that's helped our member companies at IAC, and which is a practical tool, is maybe set up alerts to track new filings and trends. Think of it as maintaining a live landscape. Even if it's a small FTO search that you've done, you have a set of keywords, you have some criteria, and you can keep it live by getting regular alerts and checking those. Lastly, ensure there's clear ownership and communication within the team. Is there someone you can assign the responsibility to? Maybe it's an IP manager, your R&D lead, or you have legal counsel. And how do you keep it visible to everyone else in the company? You can have an FTO dashboard or a register. It could be as simple as an Excel file that you maintain. It's just that everyone who's involved in that process knows that this is what's being done and this is what you're monitoring and keeping a track of. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, the scoping is the part where you decide how much you invest and how focused your work is and how efficient it is. If you were to go back today and start putting a statement of work for your FTO, what should be in it? Whatever you put in that document, it should tell the searcher exactly what to look for and what not to look for. Because most SMEs, as we've seen in our experience, are limited for money, basically. So if you just expand your scope, you will end up spending more money. But if you keep it focused, then it's strategic. The first part is the definition and the technical context for your product. Maybe start with a clear, structured view of what's being developed. And remember, this could be even for your internal team or you're going with a service provider. Outline the key components, materials, processes, and describe how the product works and not just its structure. You could, for example, include diagrams, process flowcharts. All of this information makes it easier for the searchers or your search team to interpret your technology correctly. Also note which features are core to the product and which are optional. That helps keep the search focused and on what really matters. The next part is competitor and market context. Here you give a background of your competitive landscape. Maybe you reference products that you're aware of, share any prior patent landscaping or searches that you've done. You can also reveal any relevant assignees, that is whoever owns the patents. Sometimes inventors. We've had companies that come and say, oh, we know this particular inventor or researcher from a university and we'd like to track their whatever work that they're doing because it's of interest to us. So you can include all of that in the document that you put together. Then obviously the geographic scope. IP rights are territorial. This is where you define the jurisdictions where you'll make, sell, or distribute your product. And especially if your resources are limited, prioritize markets based on your near-term business goals or product rollout plans. The next step is a simple one, your product timeline and development stage. If it's an early stage product, maybe concept, prototype, you want to keep as a broader search, maybe identify some potential risk zones. Later, if you're close to commercialization, your search becomes more detailed and jurisdiction specific. This next part, as I mentioned, I usually get very excited about is keyword and search strategy. Whatever work you've done before this part where you give the keywords and define your search strategy is the bridge between whatever you know before and the actual patent search. And you should be building a strong set of keywords that describe your product and technology, any synonyms, acronyms, um, patent classification codes, and competitor names, whatever you want your searcher or your external service provider to know. This step kind of takes a little bit of skill and experience, but as you keep doing it, and it's iterative too, your keywords and your search strategies keep getting better as you see the results and you see, oh, this is not what I want them to search, this is where I want them to focus. And also you have a lot of support in this area out there. You have Google Patents, which is a free tool. You have paid platforms like, if you've not heard of Pat's Here, PatSnap, Orbit, Derwent, Inography. There are many tools out there that can help you. The Google Patents is good for basic keyword searches and quick overviews. It does have some filters. You can filter by jurisdiction. You're able to filter by assignee too. It's a decent interface if that's what you have access to. But then when you look at paid tools, they're a little bit more expensive, but they offer advanced filters. And your keyword strategies can involve a lot of Boolean operators. I won't get into too much of that, but you basically refine your search strategy using and or those other Boolean operators. Those are standard across multiple platforms. But then there are just simple filters that you can use. You can use a filter for jurisdiction. Say you just want US patents, you just want Canadian patents, date range. My technology is just is very new. So maybe I just go back 5 years and not 20 years. You know your competitors, so you can even filter using your competitors. And most of these tools nowadays also have AI-powered features. Careful when you use them, but they can be useful. At IAC, we help companies build these keywords and search strategies and how to use all of these tools effectively. We have toolkits and training resources for our member companies, but we also provide one-on-one support for our full members. So if you want to get in touch with IAC, there are details at the end of it, and there's a few different ways we can help with that. The last one is exclusions and boundaries. Since we are talking about keeping the study focused, and we also hear from a number of companies that we don't have the money to do a full-blown FTO search, what should we focus on? This is what you focus on. Maybe there's technologies that are out of scope. For example, if you are into solid-state batteries, maybe when you look for batteries, you want to exclude lithium-ion batteries because that could actually skew your search results quite a bit. And it helps your search team stay focused, avoid wasting time on filtering out irrelevant patents. So any exclusions and boundaries, you define them here. Finally, the deliverable and expectations of what exactly the deliverable should look like. We hear from a lot of companies when they come to us, oh, we got a list of 1,000 patents. We don't know what to do with it because you did not scope out the search initially. So do you want a simple patent list that's relevant? Do you want a summary report with claim highlights? Do you want, in one of these paid tools, do you want a dashboard where you can search, filter, and look through the results? What exactly do you want? What is the output you're looking for? Lastly, timelines and budget. So you know it's not a surprise when you get a bill from your service provider. So the key takeaway here is your scoping document is not just a checklist, it's a roadmap for your FTO work. It translates your technical and business context into search strategies and filters. And the stronger and more detailed your scoping document, the better your service provider starting point, and the more useful your FTO results will be. We'll also share a few of IAC's toolkits with you after this session, and the rest are available through our member-only IP Hub. And we'll discuss how to become a member at IEC later. Lastly, there is another important concept that Sharon needs to address, which also fits into the scope and the amount of money you spend on an FTO. Sharon?
Oh, yeah, next slide, please. Thanks, Sporty. I do have a question. You mentioned, Google patents, and then you mentioned some paid platforms as well. Are there risks associated with using free platforms?
There are. If you're going to take the entire definition of your product and put it in a free search tool, it's basically in the public. So there is risk of accidental exposure. So that's a risk. The paid search tools may offer more protection. They are expensive, but whatever you put in them is not being made public, unlike Google or even ChatGPT these days.
Thanks, Sporty. I get this question a lot from our company. So when they are looking into FTO, how do they decide how much resources, like budget and time, to allocate to FTO assessments and mitigation? Well, not every FTO risk will require you to go out and hire a professional to do a full-blown search. Here at NGen, we advocate for a pragmatic and targeted approach, meaning the amount of resources you allocate should be proportional to the level of the risk. So like any other business risk, you can use a risk matrix to score your FTO risk by first choosing the impact number, which represents the impact to the business if the risk were to occur, and then picking the likelihood number that represents the likelihood of this risk happening. So then you multiply the two numbers together to get your risk score. The higher the risk score, the more resources you should allocate. So let's give you an example. Let's say your IP asset is an AI algorithm that you developed in-house, and you only implement it internally to optimize your manufacturing process. In this case, it would be very difficult for an outsider to figure out what your IP is and how it works. So the likelihood of someone enforcing the patent on you would be relatively low. So let's say likelihood score of 1 or 2. And the impact of not being able to use the algorithm would likely be minor as well, because you can still perform your manufacturing process without the algorithm. It just won't be as efficient. So that would be a low score, like 1 to 2. So in this case, because the risk score is low, you might decide that patent searches might not be necessary at all. On the other end of the spectrum, let's say your company sells electronic mousetraps. And this morning, one of your engineers shows you a patent. And when you read the patent, it looks like your company's flagship product infringes on this patent. So in this case, the likelihood number would be high, maybe a 4 or a 5, because the patent owner can go out and buy your mousetrap, take it apart, and see how it works. The impact number in this case would also be high because your company's main source of revenue comes from the sale of this product. So the impact would be catastrophic if you get sued and the patent owner wins and stops you from selling the product. Since this FTO risk has a very high score, it will warrant more resources, more internal scrutiny, and likely external legal review. So you can better understand the risk, which then helps you make more informed decisions on how to mitigate. And then anything else in between, anything with a medium risk score, will generally still require some amount of patent searching. And this can be done internally within your company without hiring external experts, as long as you train your staff to do patent searching. Also, keep in mind that the risk score for any FTO risk could change depending on what you find with your patent searches. So the key takeaway here is you should assess the FTO risk level before you decide how much time and money to spend on mitigation, and understand what those mitigation activities should be. And again, document, right? Your risk management policy should also include a description of actions to take for each risk score so that you can ensure some consistency in your FTO strategy. Next slide, please. Okay, back to you, Sporthy.
Thanks, Sharon. As I think we've discussed all of this before, just summarizing, excuse me. So FTO is not a one-time check, it's a continuous strategy. You don't just do it once and it's done. And ideally, it goes along with the patent landscape. Again, another webinar on that, but it goes along with a patent landscape, which is live and you're monitoring continuously. If you don't have the resources to do that, simple things like just set up alerts using a patent tool. We can help you with that if you're an IAC member, but it's a continuous strategy. That was the second part. And a structured FTO approach reduces uncertainty, but it's not absolute. It's not 100%. It reduces risk. It gets you in a position where you can make informed decisions, but that's it. And it has to be structured, and the scope, where you set the scope, is a main part of that structure. And as Sharon just mentioned, use a risk matrix to prioritize actions. Look at the probability of risk and how catastrophic it is, and that's what defines how much money, resources, time you spend on that. Also, FTO enables innovation, not limits it. So do it, please do your FTO. It's, again, going back to the willful infringement portion of it, there is a way to do it, and it can be an asset. So do it not just because your investor is asking you to do it or somebody else is asking you to do it, but it is for your business. Next slide, please. So we have a few different programs at IAC, and our goal is to help our cleantech SMEs with IP strategy. The first one is IP upskilling. As I mentioned, we have a lot of toolkits, resources, and we have an IP hub, which our members have access to. There are a lot of resources there to, again, how to search, how to build your strategy, FTO searches, patent landscapes, how to work with external service providers. Things like this are included on the IP hub as well as resources. We'll share a few after this, but if you want more, you'll have to join IAC. The second part is IP funding. Our full members as well as our associate members get access to grants multiple times in a year. And also you get, for full members who pay a fee and join us, they do get the feedback in IP credits, which you can spend on any of the IP activities. Then the IP intelligence, which I am actually part of, we have about 3 to 4 reports that we create in a year. They're very comprehensive, which combine patent landscape analysis, market analysis. We also do research on policies. And we try to make it as practical as possible for SMEs to digest that information. We also give access to the raw patent data, as well as we help them analyze the data. We've had members come to us and say, hey, I looked at the report. I looked at the energy storage report. I need access to metal air batteries, patents related to metal air batteries. So we've given them the data. We've helped them analyze it. We also provide one-on-one support with helping build your search strategies, scoping your FTO searches, scoping patent landscapes, and all of these are for full members. The patent portfolio and insurance, maybe Ron can get into it.
Sure. So the patent portfolio is basically being built to provide IAC members with counter leverage if they ever got into a patent dispute with another company. The concern that the people that started IAC had was SMEs generally don't have very many, if any, patents, and that puts them at significant risk if a larger company that has a lot of patents decides that they want to use those patents to either force them from the market or to put them in a position where they need to take a license and be paying royalties and eroding their So the portfolio is basically being built to have patents that, if that situation were to arise, member companies would be able to tap into it to get patents that they could use to counter assert. A counter assertion is basically if you receive a letter from someone saying, we need to have a discussion, you're infringing these patents that we own, these are the devices that you're shipping that are in basically infringing them. You would like to ideally be able to turn around and say, sure, happy to have that conversation. By the way, these are the patents that we have access to that we believe these devices you make and sell infringe. Let's have that discussion. That's a much better position to be in than saying, you know what, I'll just exit the market or I'll pay whatever you want in the way of a royalty. So the portfolio was being built to provide patents that members could use to do that if that situation arose. We currently have a little over 200 patents in the portfolio, and they're in technologies ranging from battery management, building management systems. There are some related to imaging technologies. We have some related to hydrogen production and storage. I'm probably forgetting a few areas, but it's a thing that's being continuously worked on. We're constantly looking at new patents to add to it. And it really depends with, anything we're looking at buying, what is the benefit overall that it's going to provide to the collective? Do we have members that are, in that specific space that it would be relevant to? Are these patents going to be relevant to a company that would pose risk to those members? So those are the considerations. The IP insurance is basically meant to be something where if you receive a letter from someone, saying that you're infringing patents and you end up involved in litigation or something, litigation gets expensive very quickly. The IP insurance, to my knowledge, provides up to $1 million in coverage for that litigation if you are sued. It also provides up to $500,000 for you to basically assert your own patents. So if you became aware of a competitor or someone that is infringing a patent and you needed to basically, send them an inference, put them on notice and potentially be involved in litigation with them, that again is expensive. The insurance covers up to $500K in costs related to that sort of thing.
So question on IP insurance, in terms of timing, when should you look into IP insurance in your overall FTO strategy?
So it really depends on what stage you're at, to my mind. If you're a company that's really at the idea stage or you're just building prototypes and things, I don't think the insurance, it should be that big a concern. To my mind, once you start selling into a geography where you're at risk of being involved in patent litigation, then it becomes far more important. So in Canada, there's next to no IP litigation. Well, sorry, there's next to no patent litigation. And if you're selling into the US, there's a ton of patent litigation. So your risk increases exponentially as soon as you enter different markets. That's when I think you need to be looking at IP insurance.
And maybe before you do your FTO search and find that you're already infringing on someone's patents, because the way insurance works, as any insurance works, you can't get into an accident and then go get an insurance. So it has to be before that.
Okay, thank you. Someone asked about whether the patent portfolio has patents relating to batteries. Can you recall off the top of your head?
It does. We have some patents related to battery management systems.
Okay,
Yeah, and I
fantastic.
put the link for the entire portfolio. It's public. So I put a link there. You can check it out.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, next one is basically how you can join IAC, where you can reach us, or if you have any questions, please, this could be our time.
I just have one quick comment. We focus on patents in this webinar, But of course, there are other IP rights out there that you should be aware of that you should consider in your FTO strategy. A quick example, I was talking to a company recently and they launched this amazing product and they picked a name. They're like, oh yeah, we just, we're looking into filing a trademark application. As I was talking to them, I did a 5-second search and I found a registration in the US that is bang on for the same products. So before you go out spending all this money marketing, it's very expensive to rebrand. So think about other, like in addition to patents, there are other IP rights that you should think about. Is there anything else, Sporthy or Ron, you can think of?
I don't have
No.
any.
Awesome. Okay, well, we have 2 minutes. Are there any questions?
I guess not. Everyone is going to go and scope that FTO right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Or at least start planning an FTO strategy. So yeah, thank you very much, Ron and Sporthy. Yeah, and if you guys have follow-up questions, please do not hesitate to email us. We're happy to help. Okay, have a great
Thanks
rest
for
of your
having
day.
us.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.